The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. The specific purpose of my speech is to inform my audience about Franklin D. Roosevelt and what all he has done for America, to show how much he has impacted us as individuals and our more elderly relatives. Each of us should care about this because Franklin D. Roosevelt was president during one of America's most memorable moments in history. It was the time of World War II, attack on Pearl Harbor. I have knowledge through doing extensive research on Franklin D. Roosevelt. Today I will provide a brief biography of this person's life, one of his famous speeches, and the impact of that famous speech. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit about his life. He was born January 30th, 1882, in Hyde Park, New York. He was diagnosed with polio in 1921. In 1933, he became the 32nd U.S. president and was the only president to be elected 4 times. Franklin D. Roosevelt led the U.S. through the Great Depression and World War II. In 1945, he died in Georgia. Franklin D. Roosevelt's family was very successful and financially stable early on through real estate and trade. He was an only child. FDR was surrounded by privilege, a sense of self-importance. He was educated by tutors and governess until age 14. He got plenty of attention growing up due to the fact that he was the only child. Franklin D. Roosevelt attended Groton School for Boys, which is a very prestigious prep school. He didn't fit in with the other boys, which made it very difficult for him. He graduated from Groton and then attended Harvard University. He was a C student but became a member of the Alpha Delta Pi fraternity. While attending Harvard, his last year, he became engaged to Eleanor Roosevelt, which is his 5th cousin. FDR studied law at Columbia University and passed his bar exam in 1907. After finishing college, Roosevelt was invited to run for the New York State Senate in 1910. He ran as Democrat in a district that had been voted Republican for 32 years prior to the election. He won the election. He learned many political tactics through his election, and in 1920 he accepted the nomination for vice president, but ended up losing in the general election. He was elected president 4 times after that. Now that I have provided you a brief synopsis of this person's life, let's talk about his famous speech. One of his most famous speeches is the Pearl Harbor Address to the Nation. Pearl Harbor Address to the Nation took place in Washington, D.C. Its purpose was to inform the nation of what the Japanese had done and what the U.S. was going to do in return. Roosevelt was a very firm, loud tone, showing that he was not going to lay down and take it. He also had sorrow for what had happened and the people that were lost. Even with polio, Roosevelt stood up with the braces on his legs because he didn't want to show weakness and vulnerability sitting in the wheelchair. He stood firm and strong, showing how angered he was, but also to show the country is not weak. Now that I've provided you an overview of his famous speech, let's talk about the impact the speech left in society. The attack is one of the most memorable times in the U.S. history. It happened in a time when the country was already down and weak due to the Great Depression. His speech gave people hope and the feeling of relief because they knew the U.S. wasn't going to back down and take it. The purpose of my speech was to inform you about Franklin D. Roosevelt and what all he has done for the U.S. Today I have provided a brief biography of this person's life and the famous speech about Pearl Harbor and the impact of that speech.